Alrighty, so I just want to go over some developmental milestones from birth all the way to 2 years. Starting off, I just grouped them in month groups just to help me synthesize the information. The first one is birth to 2 months. So at this age in prone, you're going to see a lot of physiological flexion, meaning that their body is very just tucked in, everything is nice and close to the core. You'll see a little bit of a slight lifting of the head and turning just kind of from cheek to cheek. In supine, you'll see some visual play, but it's mostly random at this point because their vision's not very good and their movements are not very accurate. So you'll kind of just see swiping at mobiles. And then I did want to include reflexes in this just because, just as a review from the last video. Again, they're grouped just the way I did last time. All of these are reflexes from birth that develop in utero, and then these down here develop after birth. So gallant, rooting, and then beside it I put when they integrate, which is 2 months. Suck, swallow, traction, integrate 2 to 5 months. Moro, ATNR, Palmer, integrate 4 to 6 months. Tonic, in a group by itself, 6 months. Plantar, integrate, group by itself, 9 months. Down here, optical head writing and labyrinth head writing. I have them together because they both have an onset of birth to 2 months, and then they don't integrate because they persist throughout life. And then down here, just a little bit about the developmental milestones for feeding. At this point, you'll see a sucking and a suckling pattern, and they're going to be taking liquids only, so breast milk and formula at this point. And then we can move on to 3 to 4 months. So at this point, they've gained a little bit more strength, so you'll see some more weight bearing on forearms, more extension of the trunk. At this point, they're kind of lifting their head up a lot more. They're looking around. You'll see some midline tracking. So if you put them in supine and you kind of graze a toy across midline, they should track it visually, crossing midline smoothly in that arc. You'll also see depth perception and color vision developing around this age, which is going to lead a lot more to, them lifting up their head and wanting to look around and see what's going on. You'll also see that they'll, at this point, put their hands in midline to do some midline play at this point as well. And then I did put a few reflexes down here. So for these, I didn't repeat what I have up here, so the ones that apply here still apply down here, but I did add some new ones. So for instance, the Landau or Superman, it does have an onset of 3 months, so you'll see it start to develop here. It doesn't develop in utero, so you'll see it around 3 months, and then it's going to integrate around 12 to 24 months. Then the STNR is going to develop around 4 to 6 months. So you may or may not see it in this group here. And it's going to integrate around 8 to 12 months. And then I also put on here, zoom in a little bit, the neck writing and body writing, because those have an onset of 4 to 6 months. And they integrate around 5 years. While the downward parachute does not integrate and it persists, but it has an onset of around 4 months. And remember, the downward parachute is the one where you quickly lower them to the ground and their legs are going to extend out to the ground. Alrighty, so then feeding. So at this point, around that 4-month mark, you can start to give them pureed food. So liquids and pureed. You'll see some primitive phasic bite and release. So at this point, they'll actually have that up and down like bite. This actually a little later on around this group actually goes from primitive phasic biting to more of a munching. So once it's repetitive and it's rhythmic, up and down, it'll turn from phasic bite to munch. So we'll move on to that section now, the 5 to 6 month section. So 5 months, you'll see some prop sitting, also known as tripod sitting, which is simply where they will sit and support with at least one arm. So they can't independently sit at 5 months, not yet, but they can tripod sit. Then we have prone. In prone, they can lift up just like they did at 3 to 4, but now they can extend their arms. So when they're in prone, they can extend and really get a good look at what's going on around them. And also at this point, you'll see some object permanence. So this develops around 4 to 7 months ish. So just, awareness of objects and, when they're gone and things of that nature. You'll also see at 6 months some independent sitting. So they can do some circle sitting now. They don't need to have that tripod arm down. They can do it independently and do some play in sitting. You'll see rolling at 6 months. This is a big one. And also more dissociation of the sides of their body, and also a raking grasp. So when they went to get something and they just kind of rake it up that way. I did not put reflexes on this one, but just note, that there are reflexes that are associated with this. At this point, I just didn't put them on here. I also just want to note here in the 5 to 6 range that sitting develops at 6 months, right? Independent sitting at 6 months, prop sitting at 5 months. Your parachute reflexes, also known as protective reflexes, are also going to be developing around this time. It's very important that those develop along with the sitting because they are the protective response. They are the second line of defense before you could potentially get hurt if you fall over. So, just to review, we had downward parachute over here because it has an onset of 3 months. Or 4 months, sorry. An onset of 4 months. And then after downward parachute comes forward. So forward protective response. So that is if I'm tipped forward, I'm going to boom, extend my arms out and catch myself. That's going to develop at 6 to 9 months. And then after forward parachute is sidewards parachute or sidewards protective response, which is if I'm tipping to the side, I can stop myself, extend my arms out, and prevent myself from falling. That's going to develop at 7 months. And then last is backward parachute. You're going to fall back, and stop yourself from falling, and that one develops at 9. So I just wanted to really note that those are going to develop around a similar time as this. So at the time you start to independent sit, which is 6 months, you will also have started to develop your forward protective response that develops at 6 to 9 months, as well as sidewards, which is going to come at 7, and backwards, which is going to come at 9. So I just wanted to kind of note that downward, forward, sideward, and backward parachuting are going to kind of follow right after you're sitting. Alrighty, moving on to feeding for this group. I told you about the phasic biting that turns into munching. This is about 4 to 5 months. And you'll also see up and down tongue movements here. And they'll also can now take food from a spoon. So that pureed food or maybe even some cereal, they can take it off of a spoon. Then down here, moving on to the next group, 7 to 10 months. So at 7 months, you'll see they'll be in prone, and now because they can get on extended arms, they have more strength and they can pivot around. So they can turn their body by pivoting using their arms. You'll also see, this is like 7 to 10 is like the months of mobility. They can kind of start getting around a little more besides just having to roll. Now they can do the belly crawl, so the kind of army crawling around on the ground. They can also assume quadruped. And after, developmentally, after you can assume quadruped, then you can do rocking in quadruped. So just a reminder that that is the developmental sequence. Quadruped, and then rocking back and forth in quadruped, and then after that, then you will actually see creeping or forward crawling, however you want to call it. Also, in the 7th month range, you'll see some voluntary release. So they'll be able to grab something and release it on their own volition. 8 months, like I said, after quadruped comes creeping forward. Creeping and crawling are kind of confusing, but creeping is hands and knees. Crawling is actually army crawl. Then we have, at this 8 month range, they can transition from prone to sitting. So at 6 months, they can independently sit, but at 8 months, they can get into the sitting position. So you don't have to place them into it, they can get into it themselves. They can also pull to stand using some furniture. And then at 10 months, they can cruise using the furniture. So after they pull to stand at 8 months, they can kind of get around the living room using the couch. Then we have feeding. At 7 months, you'll see mastication, which mastication is just another word for diagonal chew. So instead of this kind of up and down munching, now you have side kind of diagonal chewing that way. And that's at 7 months. You'll also have lateralization of the tongue. This one is huge. 9 months. So lateralization of the tongue is when the tongue can go side to side. You need lateralization of the tongue in order to push food from one side of the mouth to the other. So this one is huge. Because of that, they can eat more types of food. So now they can finger feed and they can eat some mashed table food. A side note, when they're finger feeding, they can use a lateral pinch, which is just where the thumb touches that radial side of the index. And they can also do an inferior pinch, which is just, instead of a fine pinch, which is tip to tip, it's kind of like a palm to palm pinch, or like a pad to pad, I guess I should say. So like that. All right, let's see what else we got on here. 11 to 12 months. Alrighty, here at about 9 to 12, because it can happen a little earlier. So I just wanted to put it over here though. You'll see more crossing midline. So the ability to actually cross over, which is huge, huge, huge. They can transition sit to stand. They don't need to use furniture now. They can walk a short distance sometimes with a high guard. So high guard, remember, is like, I don't want to fall. So they got their hands up, wide base of support, and they can take a couple steps sometimes. And sometimes it happens later on. Every kid's different. Obviously, these are all just kind of, suggestions almost. Bilateral integration happens here, and you might hear first words kind of around this age range. For feeding, a lot happens. Now we moved from a munching at 5 to 6 to a mastication at 7, and now a rotary chew at 11 to 12. Because of this rotary chew, they can now eat coarsely chopped foods and then some soft meats as well. And here we go. They understand how to use a spoon now. So it's not precise or neat by any means. It's going to be very messy, but they can dip the spoon and bring it to their mouth. You're going to see a lot of inversion, meaning the spoon's going to tip over, the food's going to go all over them, but they understand spoon in the food, spoon in the mouth. You will see independent use of a cup as long as it has a lid and a spout for them to drink from. Make a note that a spout is not a straw. Okay, straw comes later. We're going to talk about it later. And they have a now fine pincer grasp. So tip to tip. 15 months. So at 15 months, just a little over a year, I'm mostly just kind of going to talk about feeding now. So you'll see increased use of spoon. It's going to be more precise. Instead of now a dipping, you'll see a scooping, which is huge. It's a lot less messy if you can scoop it and bring it to your mouth. Less spillage, but still not perfect. And the reason you have a little more precision is because at this age range of 15 months, they've got more shoulder stability, more wrist stability. So a little more precision comes along with that. And then we have 24 months, so 2 years old. At this age, they can proficiently use a spoon. They can proficiently use a straw. They will try to use a fork, but it will not be proficient yet. And they can now eat fruits, veggies, meats, and all the other stuff they were eating before. And at 30 months, a little over 2 years, they are now proficient with a spoon or fork and a spoon.